Welcome, everybody, to Broadcast Team Alpha, where we bring you cutting edge conversation while exploring the quantum possibilities. And tonight's no different. We have a really fascinating guest on with us tonight, and Augie's going to tell us about him. But first, I really want to open with like a tsunami wave of gratitude. You know, the holidays tend to, I don't know, tend to make me think. I think every day about gratitude, but I just think a little more expansively. And I'm so grateful that you guys are here with us, that you've been with us throughout the year. Um, the lively chat conversation, the sweet messages that you send us, your super chats, and just, the Christmas cards and just the tokens of affection. And we're so grateful for that. And we're so grateful for you. So, other ways that you can join us is on Sunday at the Mastermind Connection. It's 2 o'clock Eastern Time. We get together, we pool, if you will, our like-minded focused energy for a collective intention. Most of them are benevolent. And then we just wait to see how beautiful things manifest. Dangerous weather patterns, volcanoes, um, we we masterminded peace during the elections here in America, which actually happened. I'm sure we weren't the only people doing that, but nonetheless, it's part and parcel of what happens when people from around the world get together and put intentional thought with feeling into the quantum realm. Beautiful things happen. So thank you for being with us. Come join us on Sunday or send us an email to the Mastermind Connection, THE, don't forget that part, the Mastermind Connection at gmail.com. We'll send you a link. Come hang out with us and we'll see if it's something for you. So, Augie, tell us about Jeff. This is very exciting.
Yes, yeah, this is going to be fun and very educational for me because we're going to delve into a subject area that I actually have not studied very much.
And
So I'm
then
going to
we
be
just
all
wait.
ears on this one. We have Jeff Harman with us. He is an astrologer. He's a spiritual consultant. And he is in California, and he is in with the movie star crowd. He's got a lot of celebrity clients. And we just talked just a little bit before the show because we met one time here in Tucson, probably about 2004, something like that. He was speaking at the Columbus Library, and I was speaking there also on the same occasion. And then from what I hear is that we went out to dinner afterwards. And for some reason, I don't remember that, but I know we did. Do you remember this, Jeff? Oh, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I do. I remember it was a long time ago. It's God, it had to be 2004, something like that. Yeah. And I remember Jim Delatoso came and a number of other people. George Parks was there. George Parks has passed away now,
Yeah.
And I love George. And a lot of people, I think,
that's a good crowd in
Yeah.
It's a good crowd of people in Tucson. They're very spiritual and hungry for
really
knowledge.
Good.
Yeah. Yeah. And now you, I tell you, this interview came about kind of quickly, so I really haven't studied everything that you have done as much as I wanted to, but maybe you could talk a little bit about yourself, what you do, and go especially into the astrology part of it, because I'm interested, but I just don't know as much as I would.
Sure. Well, I got my start in the mid 70s. I was, I'm dating myself here, but I was driving and my mother, it's probably right around 75, my mother would, I'd go out with different girls and my mother would peg these girlfriends to the T. And I said, what do you, this doesn't seem like mother's intuition. I said, what are you doing? And she says, I have their chart. And I said, what do you mean you have their chart? She said, well, I have their astrology chart. And I said, come on, that stuff doesn't work. I said, I've heard all the stories about the gravity and the doctor in the delivery room has more gravity. And she just laughed. My mother was really an amazing lady. She had, she was actually into hemodialysis at the time. She helped a lot of people and she loved animals, and she was just a great soul. And so I said, all right, I'll check it out. And I did. And that started me on a journey. Of course, that was BC, before computers. We all remember that, right? And we thought we were really special when we got the Commodore 64. Remember those? And a Commodore 128 in the late 70s.
Yep.
And so we started casting charts. And, astrology is very abstract. It's exceedingly complex. It's what I love about where my mom started me is I learned that the modern versions of astrology have in some ways really become watered down. I have a nickname for it. Some of it, not all of it, is love, light, and cluelessness. Not that the love and light isn't good, but it's really lost its divinity. This is why I like Vedic astrology and some of the things that I learned later on, because it really gets into us as souls having a physical experience, where modern astrology, everyone knows their sun sign. I'm an Aries, I'm a Libra, I'm a this. And I say, no, you're not. You're a spiritual being having a physical experience. And the older stuff that she got me started in took me down that path. And then I got really blessed in the 80s. I started working with all these different religious organizations. Some were Catholicism, some were Christian, some were Hebrew and Jewish. And it was really fascinating. I had a recording studio and I got to do all these different things. And the whole time I was on this journey of astrology and spirituality. And what was fun for me was to see, like, I actually worked with Mother Teresa in early 1980, right when she won the Nobel Peace Prize. And she was a wonderful lady, got to film her with the studio. And, I just was really blessed to see all these different viewpoints. I always say religions are like a diamond. You can rotate them around. There's many viewpoints of God, and you'll never, ever figure it all out. And I think where we get into problems when we start thinking we know, or not being open to realms of possibility and spirituality from many different viewpoints. And I was blessed that I got a little bit of that growing up with my mother. And then astrology, everybody calls me an astrologer. And I really say, in the ancient world prior to the 1700s, they never called astrology. You know what they called it? Astronomy. Now, today, living in Tucson, I noticed how many wonderful astronomers there were. But if you have a conversation with today's astronomer about anything connected with the spiritual essences of astrology and the planets, you kind of get a blank stare. Mm-hmm. Or worse yet, they might walk away. And God bless them. But here's the point. It's really lost. It's kind of like when we went into this modern materialism, the Industrial Revolution, and the whole Darwinism and all of that, which has brought humanity wonderful things. We really lost the connection to, I think, that real spiritual essence of what it used to be, And I think now is an apropos time to talk about that, because we're moving into a new era now that's probably more, I think, disassociating the spirit to us. And I love your talk, by the way, when you first introduced, when she introduced I don't know if she can hear me, but I think she can, the show, where you talked about how the prayers that you had done with the show might have affected peace and all that. Well, that's really true. Thoughts and all that are really powerful. And this gets into the whole realm of what ancient astrology talked about, is that we really find we do have free will. And the religions railed against astrology in the early portions of, maybe the 1st through 3rd century, particularly Rome, because they said, oh, it's the work of the devil. Well, actually, if you look at the ancient works, it might be the work of God's fingers on the soul. And I think Vedic astrology and some of the more ancient systems actually prove that.
Mm-hmm.
So wasn't it true? Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Great. Wasn't it true, Jeff, that in Christianity, that the wise men knew that a king was being born because they were following a star, right? Yep. And the talk now is that we're in end times, and the planetary alignment is completely unique, right? As to how it's ever been before. Is that true?
Well, yeah, that I don't know. That's a pretty big statement. But I think the planetary alignments have been in a lot of places before. And when you look at precession of the equinoxes, they say about every 25,700 something years, we go around the central sun. That gets into stuff that no one fully knows, maybe that other than God and the angels, but the yugas in Vedic astrology talk about there may be 250 million year galactic cycles. That's why I look at modern astrology and I just say, to demean the human spirit to we're all just Libras and Scorpios and sun signs is really, I mean, you could line up every Libra on the planet, every Scorpio, every Aries, and any sun sign you want and look them in the eye. There's not a single soul the same, just like there's not a single snowflake the same. There's not a single human being the same.
Exactly.
Yeah. But, the calendar that we're talking about too, we got to remember that the astrological calendar, that was before even the Gregorian or the any other newer calendars. So the wise men of those days back there, they may have been studying that old calendar about the alignment of the planets. So maybe there was a couple of stars that came together and created a bigger one.
It was Jupiter. It was a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. Yeah. See, that's you're broaching a subject that's really interesting. I have some ancient documents that were just translated out of Chaldean, Aramaic, and Hebrew, and nobody knows where they came from ultimately, but they're called the astrology of the world. And we think in terms of years, months, days, and weeks. And what's interesting is this talked about how the celestial mechanics of the solar system was the world changed on Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions. Every 1,000 years, Jupiter and Saturn would conjoin in Aries. And then every 200, approximately 40 years, it's not exact, because the years don't line up with celestial cycles. That's why we have leap years. If the calendar was perfect, why do we have leap years? The Mayan calendar was probably the closer one because it had one day at a time, and so there's many calendars. You have the Gregorian, you have the Julian, and going back and back. There's all kinds of calendars. None of them work perfect. You got to always readjust it because the cycles of the solar system, which are amazingly accurate. Many people listening may have heard of a guy named Robert Hand. Robert Hand is an astrologer who started a company called Astrolabe. And my mother studied with him, and I studied with Robert, and I love Robert. He's really a great mind in astrology. In fact, he worked on Project Hindsight, this group that had started translating much of the old Latin and the Hebrew stuff into English. And what's interesting about Robert is I was talking to him in the early 80s when we were working on DOS computer programs. Remember those, // And what happened was Robert was working with NASA because they were developing something called an ephemeris. And for anybody listening, an ephemeris is simply a fancy word for where are the celestial planets every single month, day, and week. And you have to fit the celestial motions of the heavens into man's calendar. So they call it an ephemeris. So astrologers we used to do that. When my mom and I would cast charts, we'd go to this book. I remember it was Llewellyn's astrological chart maker, right? So we'd get this book, we'd get the ephemeris, we'd figure out where all the planets were at that moment in time. In fact, I got something here. I just spotted on my desk. This is an old astrolabe. Look at this thing. This was used over 2,000 years ago. What it is it's got a plate that you rotate, and there's different, it's hard to see, but there's little grooves inside of here that literally fit the latitude that you're at. And this is an amazing instrument. You could even tell how high a wall was. So Chaucer, 2,000 years ago, gave this to his, I believe it was 2,000, don't quote me if I'm wrong, but look it up on the internet. Everything's there. Anyways, long story short is this is what astrologers would do. In fact, I did an Instagram post not long ago. I was at the Huntington, and they had an astral clock. And some of the old astrologers, here, I'll show you something kind of fun. This is probably one of the last of what I
Aw,
like to call
who's that?
that's my beautiful dog who just passed away. That's
Oh,
Shelby.
Oh,
I'm
I,
sorry.
she just died about 2 weeks ago. And I have a
I'm
quick story to tell you. If anyone thinks that we don't have souls, this dog passed away. And about 2 hours later, she ran up alongside of me. I was down in Beverly Hills and she was all around me. I could feel her energy just totally around me. And then she like licked me and hugged me on the astral plane and boom, she was gone. And I have not seen her since. And I made a prayer that she was, you could see her, how sweet she was. I made a prayer that the group spirits take her away and bring her to a much better place. Because I'll tell you what, that dog was special and I really miss her. I can't look at her anymore. It breaks me up. But anyhow, long story short, what I was just speaking about is there was a man, I call him the caboose. Why I call him the caboose is because his name was William Lilly. William Lilly was an astrologer who lived in the 1600s, of course, 1602 to 1681. And he basically was involved right before the United States was formed, of course, getting rid of King Charles II. This was King Charles I. And as we know, as history tells us, King Charles I was beheaded. Well, Lilly actually predicted that. King Charles came to Lilly, and look, you actually see he drew a chart by hand, no computers in 1600s. And look he's got his little book, and look at that plate. Isn't that a beautiful picture? Anyways, long story short, excuse me, William Lilly was asked by King Charles I, if I go against Parliament, will I win? And you remember back then there was this real, not to get into history, but there was this real war between Parliament and the monarchs. Well, Lilly cast a chart called a horary chart. Now, that's a Latinized term. Horary is really a name I don't like. It's here, I'll show you here. Horary astrology is really my favorite type of name. It's called interrogation. In India, they call it prashna. Here, a lot of astrologers call it horary. I like to call it interrogation. It's just simply not your birth chart. It's casting a chart for the moment in time you break a question. It's divinational, and I use it every single day, and I'm always astounded that it proves your consciousness is an interactive conscious with the entire celestial mechanics of this earth and the solar system. And even to the flat earthers, I say, listen, whatever it is, we're interacting with it. So my point is, Lilly made a chart called an interrogation or horary, and he told King Charles, if you go against Parliament, you're going to lose. And he says, don't do it. Well, the king did what he did anyways. We all do what we want to do. That's free will. So he went against Parliament and he got decimated. And then he sent a messenger. Of course, back then you didn't have cell phones. So he sent the messenger through the woods and said to Willie, oh my God, you were right. They decimated my armies. They're going to capture me. Which way do I go? And Lilly cast a chart, said north by northeast. He didn't head the right way and they caught him. And of course, we know his history reports King Charles laid his head on a block and got his head chopped off. So that's really, he was one of the last of the astrologers. I call him the caboose to maybe thousands of years of astrology that is so different than today's astrology. And I'm not demeaning any of today's astrologers because there are a lot of wonderful ones, but a lot of it has become so trite. You are not your sun sign. You are a spiritual being having a physical experience. This is why I love Vedic astrology. Vedic is kind of a pop term. That actually was coined by a friend of mine who just passed away, and I love to mention him on air, Chakrapani. A lot of people will remember Chakrapani. He was a very famous Indian astrologer. I used to go to dinner with him and Howard Beckman, who also passed away, and wonderful Vedic astrologers. And he came from India, Chakrapani, and he said, how are we going to get to Americans to understand the spirituality? So he nicknamed it Vedic astrology. And it comes from the Vedas, which is the texts and scriptures of ancient India, and much more ancient than that, maybe. And the real name of Vedic astrology is called Jyotisha. See, the average American's not going to listen to the word Jyotisha. If you say, hey, I practice Jyotisha, they're going to go, you practice what? So Vedic astrology worked. And Jyotisha actually unpacks into the science of the light of the soul. We find a lot of the ancient words, like in Hebrew, Aramaic, and other words, they're cryptographic. They actually have numerology encrypted in them. And so Jyotisha actually means the science of the light of the soul. There's several branches. The most Vedic astrologers practice Maharishi Parashara's methods. Others practice Maharishi Jaimini's, which are all wonderful. But the one that captured me was Naadi astrology. Why? Naadi, you can see some people spell it one A, but it's really amazing because many people may have heard of the Naadi palm leaves in India, where they literally, you walk up to some little guy in a hut in some little village in southern India or northern India, and they'll say, "What is your name? What is your birthday?" And then he trots in the back room, rifles through a bunch of palm leaves, literally all these encrypted palm leaves. And then they'll come back out and tell you about your parents and your soul. That was the one. I had a teacher back in the, God, it had to be the early 90s, actually. His name was Kanapriya, or mid 90s, I can't remember. But he was stunning. He's dead now. He used to do astrology for the Rothschilds and the Bilderbergers. You ever hear of those guys? And they're in London. And we know what they do. They print our money. They're the owners that George Carlin talked about so much in The American Dream. And anyways, they own this place. Forget the politicians, they own this place. So what was fascinating is he did a lot of work for these kind of bankers. And I met him here. And the fascinating thing was he would take an astrology chart and he looked at it so differently than any other astrologers I've ever seen. He'd go, well, this person will get married here. They'll take a good education. Or his father was horrible. His father was wonderful. His mother was this. And he said, and they'll die about this age. And he did it not just a couple of times. He did it on a lot of charts. And then I acquired this document, which is very ancient, that talks about this. And I found documents. I've been studying this for like 30 years. And to my amazement, you'll never figure it out, ever. I am so humbled. It's God's code. It literally is. This is a diagram I love to show. Whatever your belief in God is. Hang on for a second.
Could you go back to that picture one more time? Just the previous picture? Just for a second.
Yeah.
That picture, I love that picture. You see the cycle of life, lower left-hand corner, like a little baby getting bigger and bigger. And then off to the right, you're back to dust again.
Yeah, that's
Look
right.
at that picture.
Well, your body is, not you. Yeah.
Thank you. If you look below the infant, there is a skull.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right.
Yes.
Well, the most important thing to this picture, by the way, for anyone watching, you may recognize this. This is a plate out of a very wonderful text in India called the Bhagavad Gita, probably one of the central texts to ancient Hinduism and Buddhism. So what's interesting about this, and by the way, they actually said the missing years of Christ were quite possibly spent in India. So it's very interesting. Anyways, long story short,
there's evidence of him having been there.
There is. That's right. That's exactly right, my friend. One of my clients wrote a book about that. He was from Tucson too. Anyways, he's in Texas now. I haven't spoken to him for a while. This white etheric energy is believed to be the very interesting conscious fabric known as the spirit, psyche, and soul. And they are not one and the same. Very interesting stuff. So, I'm glad you brought that up. And you can see that energy seems to pass from lifetime to lifetime to lifetime, which brings me to the diagram I was going to jump to. Whatever your belief in God, everyone has a belief in God. Some people say it's Jesus. Other people say, no, it's Buddha. Other people say, no, it's the guy with the beard in the sky. Whatever it is, or all divine light, we all have some belief in God. At least I hope we do, or you're in trouble. But anyways, the long story short is beneath that, we get into the world called absolute. Absolute is a strange word, which means the divine emanation of souls, or where souls are created. Your soul is believed to be created right here. There ain't no astrology up here. There's no Pisces and Aries and, Tauruses and Geminis. Ain't happening. You don't have any rotating galaxies up here. The seraphims and the cherubims and the thrones are believed to rule this realm. This is exceedingly divine. In fact, we'll all be lucky when we snap back up there. But our root comes from there. They say there's 49 dimensions and 49 subdimensions, exceedingly vast, way beyond my comprehension. The next worlds down, Braya, is called creation. This is where the waters coalesce from the angels to much denser, you could say, fabricated etheric energy, very deep stuff. They say the dominance and virtues and powers rule this. They say there's 49 dimensions and 49 subdimensions. Vast. The next worlds down is probably one of the most important, not that these aren't, but they are what physicists will call the physical realms. Yetzirah is an Aramaic or Hebrew word which specifically means formation, or where the density of the heavenly forms come into play. What's interesting is this is where the rotating galaxies, the amino gas clouds, and all the stuff science is busy categorizing and organizing is believed to exist. And just a little FYI, and notice over here the familiar archangels, angels, intelligence, and spirits. Now we start getting into the hierarchies we're more familiar with. The Milky Way could be way down here, and our little solar system on the speck edge of it's right about here. This is the mind bender. They claim, and this, I believe this to be true, there could be 49 parallel universes and 49 subdimensions in each one. Now, I don't know about you, but that's a mind bender. And that's amazing. The last world is the world's called Asaya. Asaya is a strange word. And for those who are proficient at Hebrew, forgive my pronunciation because, you know, it is a little different on different dialects. But Asaya is the astral planes. And they actually call this the pouch of the slingshot. Now, isn't that an interesting term? Pouch of the slingshot means when you and I and everyone else drawing breath exits the body, which Naadi Astrology calls not death, they call it liberation of karma. Isn't that interesting? Liberation of karma. Ponder that for a minute. So what's fascinating is we don't die. We liberate from the purification and the rectification of the soul that's going on here. Do you see how much more divine this is than you are a Pisces and you exhibit this and you're a little Aries and you're a Gemini? No. You're much more than that. How could you not be if your soul is created right beneath God? And I believe that we are fragmented, and maybe they say that there's many theories, and I do not purport to be any authority. Nobody I've ever met is, at least if they're humble. The thrones is believed to bring us down and enthrone us in a ethereal, they call it an etheric double. It's a special body that encases the soul, is one way to look at it. It's like a vehicle for the soul that allows us to come here and reincarnate for multiple amounts of time. Some of us, it may be once or twice. Some of us, it may be hundreds and thousands of times. And then when that journey of that karmic purification and experience, it's not just all bad either. We're also here gathering and gaining experiences. That's when we exit Alcatraz, known as Earth. It's not. Earth is actually really beautiful. I just joke around about that. But I call Earth the soul cauldron, because that's when in the Vedic scriptures and the Upanishads, the Egyptians say the same thing. We go on to other realms. We also may stay back and help our brothers and sisters also move on from the journey we picked here. So Earth seems to be a very divine and very challenging and special place for the soul. And of course, we don't want to admit our buddies here. Usually we get someone with a suit tie and a microphone telling us about the devil, but it's a little bit more than that. It's the Lucifer, Satan, Belial, and Leviathan are the four who were cast down, and there's legions upon legions upon legions. And what's fascinating about this is we hear this in Genesis and the Garden of Eden story. Probably true. Definitely. But you hear the same story in the Gita, the Bhagavad Gita. You hear the same story in the Egyptians, the Chaldeans, and other versions. They just call them different things or different names, different languages. The story is almost the same, folks. So it's very interesting. What is astrology? That's what I like to get to. What is astrology? There's the $1 billion question. It is not you. It is the karmic journey in what I like to call the realm of time. In fact, there's a great saying Gandhi said once. He said, God created time so everything wouldn't happen at once. I thought, wow, that's ingenious. It's true. Because what is time? Take a look at this diagram. This sheds a bit of light on that. The Earth is rotating every day. Folks, the sun ain't rising and setting. Now, it is from our myopic perspective, but the Earth is rotating, which makes the appearancy of the sun rising, cumulating, setting, and going to midnight. The moon is whipping around the Earth, right? About every month. This is why calendars don't really work, is because this, and by the way, I mentioned earlier, Robert Hand, and what a beautiful experience that was for me. He was telling me about the computer programs they were designing, the very early computer programs that astrologers now all use. He worked with NASA because NASA, I don't know if you know about NASA, but NASA is a very interesting little thing started by Jack Parsons. Aleister Crowley was involved, a very interesting Secret Order of the Golden Dawn magician, and I don't like that guy. But and also there's actually a spirit, and NASA in Hebrew stands for one who flies through the air. Isn't that interesting? But anyways, isn't that interesting? But long story short, back to this, the celestial mechanics are so accurate. Robert Hand and I were discussing that probably 40 years ago now, how there's wobble to the Earth. Yes, there's a little wobble to this and that, but the mechanics of the ascensions and the mechanics of the rotations and the orbits of the planets aren't kind of accurate. They're accurate to the millisecond, This is like the finest tuned clock or watch that you could ever get all the way out to Pluto. It's stunning how accurate it is. Yeah, we're learning more about the orbits and the trajectories of planets as we get more advanced in science. But what we're finding is how accurate it is. And why is the Earth hanging at a 23-degree, 44-minute angle? That's a fancy term that people throw around to sound impressive called the obliquity of the ecliptic, which just means the Earth's at an angle. That's why in the wintertime, and if you live in the north, it gets cold. In the summertime, it gets hot because the sun appears to go north and south of the ecliptic. That's why the equinox is a Latinized term for equal. It's when the sun and the Earth cross its ecliptical orbital planes, and the angularity of the Earth, it lines up. So this stuff is kind of a mind bender to look at for just a minute, because you go, well, wait a minute. What is time? If we were somewhere else, time would be totally irrelevant. So astrology is God's way of putting a soul in these meat suits, I like to call bodies, and we are here, amazing organisms that we are, and so are the animals and the plants and all the other life, And what's interesting is this is like a really divine, magical, alchemical system that we all get to come here and have free will and play in. And astrology shows the energy impacting upon that as we go through. It's fascinating. It's a fascinating journey.
We get to play and learn and grow, and there's a lot of benefits to this.
Stub our toes, yes, all that. Yes.
Yeah, there we go. And that hurts. But I got one question too that I know the listeners will be very interested in learning. In astrology, you have a little insight that most of us on not doing it don't have. If you look into astrology, what is coming next for us? On this Earth plane? We're going through some strange time right now. There is this calamity going on, and what's going to happen with that? And maybe there's also other thoughts of ascension.
Glad you brought that up. Yeah.
Hey.
Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about that, because I'm glad you roped me in on that one, because I love to talk about the divinity of creation. I think it's stunning. Anyone who thinks creation is amazing, once we get our head out of our checkbooks, our daily clocks, and all the things else that we do, and just take a look at a butterfly sometime, and you find me a geneticist who can create that, or create a little embryo, or the magic that happens in life. Ask any woman who's had a child. That's some pretty divine stuff. So long story short, what's going on? Well, you brought up a subject that I really, really like. It was known as the astrology of the world. And this is very germane to the diagram I just brought up. See, if you look at the solstices are where the earth is at, where the sun appears to be at its lowest point. The summer and winter solstice is where the sun is highest at the summer solstice and lowest at the winter. So it's a celestial issue. And we know that that's where the sun kind of seems to stand still at those points. And the ancients always knew. They made so many monuments and so many wonderful things to that. Stonehenge, on, the Chaco Canyon, so many places, India, all these different things the Mayans did throughout thousands of years. They all knew the significance of the solstices and equinoxes. Well, today happens to be the winter solstice. And what does that mean? Well, if you look, I put this up here, and because we live in the United States, but for anybody listening internationally, because I have a lot of people who listen internationally, and I always like to honor their place too. The winter solstice happened for the United States, and it's always been a tradition to cast the chart for the place where the capital of a country is. That's always been the tradition. And you can see here, I cast this for Washington, D.C., also known as the District of Criminals. Sorry, I had to get that in there.
Yeah.
On the notice today is March. Is actually the winter solstice. Technically, something got off here. What happened here? Spring up. Oh, no wonder why. There we go. This is the winter. I selected the wrong chart. There we go. It was December 21st, which is today, Washington, D.C. And this is very specific at 10:59:08 Eastern Standard Time in Washington, D.C. And you can see this is the longitude and latitude. So that was the minute and second, based on these calculations, that the sun ingressed. Ingress is a fancy word that just means it went into this first degree, minute, and second of longitude of Capricorn. So what does that mean in plain English? Well, that's where the sun is at its lowest point. Very powerful energy. The equinoxes is where the sun and the equals, the days and the nights are equal. Equinox, equal. So these are all powerful points. So the ancients had a type of astrology that was very advanced that looked at when does the world change. And those were the big cycles we'll talk about in a minute. And then also, I just want to address the solstice because today is the solstice. And many cultures would do many sacred things on this. So it's really wonderful to light a candle. By the way, the solstice was also a time many apothecary medical astrologers in the medieval times would always say, this is a time for tonics. This is a time for rest. This is a time for rejoicing. Thanks. And again, like you had mentioned at the beginning of the show, for being grateful for what we have, and very powerful time. And notice what I did is I cast this chart in the eastern horizon would have been for the United States of America, which is in a little bit of trouble right now, but we won't get political here, but or certainly in a transformative time, I'll say that. We'll get into that in a minute. But the east, that arrow right there is where the eastern horizon was ascending at the minute and second this morning at 10:59:08 a.m. in Washington, D.C., which, by the way, isn't even in the United States. The District of Columbia is really a separate entity. It's a lot of people may know this, but Washington is really an Egyptian temple. If you take a real close look at it, there's many people have written some very good books on it. And I've been there and it's quite astounding. A lot of Masonic symbolism. It really comes out of Egyptian stuff, the obelisks, the domes, the placements, the geometry, all designed by a French architect. Quite fascinating stuff. But anyways, long story short, what this chart tends to indicate is the peril and feelings of the people right now, and I'm just kind of doing an interpretation of, worry, disengagement, and confusion. That's because Neptune is in the ascendant. See, you read these like you would read a divinational chart. It's not a birth chart. It's literally an energetic chart. And notice we've got Mars in the ninth house, making an aspect to the ascendant here by square. So this means we've got a lot of change and tension building right now. So not to get into all this stuff, but that's what the ancient astrologers would do. They would cast charts. Particularly the beginning of the year was the spring equinox. The spring equinox would allow the astrologers to see what the year was going to be like. If the eastern horizon at the place they cast it was fixed, they would use that chart for the whole year. If it was mutable, they would cast two charts, the spring and the fall equinox. If it was cardinal, these are the types of signs that astrologers refer to. Cardinal means changing. That would mean they would cast four charts: the spring equinox, the summer solstice, the fall equinox, and the winter solstice. Well, last year we actually had a cardinal. So every chart becomes very pivotal. And this one definitely shows what I'm about to talk about shortly. And that is, we are in a time of probably the greatest transformational change the United States has ever seen. Years ago, I was on radio shows and people would ask me, Jeff, what do you think of the Mayan calendar? And I said, not a thing. Cannot come up with anything about the Mayan calendar, Nibiru, or all the other stuff. And I'm not demeaning them. I'm just saying I could not come up with a thing using the ancient techniques of the astrology of the world, is what they call it. See, Moses was believed to have had an astrology, and I don't care what the religious zealots say, he did, because I actually can show you texts that purport that. There was a synagogue found in Egypt, which is the Nag Hammadi, not the Nag Hammadi. I forget the name. It's not. I'm sorry. I haven't had enough coffee today. But anyways, long story short, it was a synagogue, and I'll remember it later. But they had found all these ancient documents in there, which have really kind of changed a lot of things that Rome, the bearded men who were murdering each other, kind of instituted from the 2nd to 3rd century. Of course, they're not going to hear about that, but because then they'd admit they may not be right. Not that they were wrong, but they certainly weren't all right either. But long story short, where I'm going is this ancient astrology actually went back to the flood of Noah. And that was on something known as a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. And I've been talking about this for 20 years. People have asked me, what do you think is going to happen? And I said, well, I don't know exactly what's going to happen. Nobody does, only God does, because I think it's an interactive consciousness that astrology works on. Astrology doesn't predict the future. It influences the future. We, with that, may be the outcome of how it all ends up. Very complex. You figure that one out, let me know. But long story short, what's interesting is they would say every 1,000 years, there would be the joining of Jupiter and Saturn, the first degree and minute of Aries. And that had great significance. And then every 240 years, they would have this, what we call a mutation cycle. So they call them great conjunction and mutation conjunctions. Well, fast forward, the Industrial Revolution, that man I showed you earlier, William Lilly, he actually had warned that in the early 1700s, the world was going to change. And boy, was he right. Well, what was he doing that with? The ancient astrology. See, a lot of people will deify me and other astrologers. I say, whoa, stop. I'm just using something that's very ancient and sacred, and it's accurate. So don't deify me or any other astrologer or psychic. If we're humble, we realize we're all just in the part of helping each other. So what I love is being a part of that. That's a wonderful thing. So what's interesting is everyone said to me, well, what do you think is going to happen? I said, well, the Industrial Revolution happened. This country was formed right before the last fire sign 240-year conjunction called the fire trine conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn. And it's interesting because people say, yeah, but Jupiter and Saturn conjunct every 20 years. Yes, they do. But they don't conjoin every 20 years in the same elements like earth, air, fire, and water. They actually make a Star of David, which is mind blowing. I mean, you look at this stuff, you go, there's got to be a God, because there's no way this is happening by random chance. Not a chance. So long story short, fast forward. So I was on Coast to Coast and all these different shows, and they said, well, what do you think is going to happen next? And I said, well, I can tell you 2020 looks like it's going to be a crap storm. And I said, okay, why? I said, well, because 9/11, what? What's that?
You got it.
Yeah. Well, no, it's got it. See, if you follow the right techniques, it's got it. So what's interesting is the Saturn-Pluto opposition. I'll never forget it. I looked at Camille. Camille was pregnant with my son at the time. And I'm looking in the living room and I'm going, we're going to have something happen. Sure enough, the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, but boom, the towers, right? They come down like sparklers from jet fuel. Remember that? And I won't get into that one, but they did. And every physicist who looks at that goes, something's not right here.
Yeah.
But the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, we don't want to get you off YouTube here, so I'll shut my mouth.
No.
But long story short, the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, opposition brought us 9/11, which brought us the Patriot Act, which brought us unprecedented. You and I will never run again through an airport. Remember how we used to do that and say, wait, don't close the plane door. I've got to get on. Now we stand there, we get frisked and shaked upside down and put through magnetometers, which is fine. But the world changed from 9/11. The second Saturn-Pluto square happened on the banks crashing in 2008 and 2009. And then everybody said, well, what do you see coming up? I said, well, what I see coming up is 2020. So watch out for 2020, because we're going to have a Saturn-Pluto conjunction. So what does that mean in plain English? Well, totalitarianism. Now, we could equal that to COVID, but what has COVID really brought? If you back it all out, it's been a very interesting, and I don't want to get political here, but the world has changed since 2020, and it's going to stay that way because Saturn and Pluto conjoined. See, Saturn rules the structures of society. The Roman Empire collapsed on a Saturn-Pluto conjunction. Now, we know it collapsed over a period of 400 years, but nonetheless, it really officially went down the drain right when a Saturn-Pluto conjunction happened. These are powerful. And I know a lot of skeptics will listen to this and say, yeah, but Pluto's not even a planet. Well, okay, folks, you can call it whatever you want, planetoid, planet. They keep moving it in and out. Well, today it's a planet, tomorrow it's a planetoid, then they go back to planet. But the bottom line is that little guy, they say C4 and dynamite comes in small packages. And Pluto, I can just tell you, is punchy. And it has brought us, if I were a new world order, and I don't want to sound conspiratorial on your show, but I know I've got clients who work in some really interesting places, really smart people, like remote viewing, military stuff, and guys who are, I shouldn't mention this, but in the Fed, who are attorneys. And I hear stuff. I'll just say that. I hear stuff. That's all I can say. Yeah. And I can tell you that if I were planning to do what they just did, I would have done it on a Saturn-Pluto conjunction. Why? Because it's the perfect guys. Now, in Vedic astrology, we had something we got right now called a Kalasarpa yoga. What's a Kalasarpa yoga? That's a serpent curse. Look on the screen here where I'm at. You can see this little horseshoe is the moon's north node. This little upside down horseshoe is the moon's south node. You say, okay, cool. What's that? Well, the nodes are where eclipse points happen. When the sun and the moon and the earth align, we get an occultation on a new moon of the sun, right? Sun, lunar or solar eclipse. And the full moon is a lunar eclipse, which can only happen on a full moon, right? So here's what's interesting. Yeah, we say, okay, the angularity of the earth brings the seasons, right? The solstices and equinoxes. But even more importantly, the Vedic astrologers, in their infinite divine wisdom, and this is what's even more interesting, I don't think they had it. All this stuff seems to have come from angels. Moses, the burning bush, right? Jesus talking to God in heaven, my Father in heaven says. See, it's interesting, all this ancient knowledge, it's literally stated that it came from angels. You see? So, angels are going to know more than we'll ever know. And what I love is, in these conscious minds anyhow, because we're sitting here in a 5-dimensional, or I should say a 3-dimensional 5-sense reality for the most part. And what's interesting is they actually say the guardian angel from the thrones picks your parents. If you ask yourself, when was the time in your life, just think about this, that you had less free will than the parents you were born by? Not a one of us had any say in that one. I know I didn't. So the bottom line is they say that guardian angel from the Yetziratic world, not the one from the thrones, but this one down here, picks mommy and daddy. And when dad conceives into mom, that angel attaches the spirit, psyche, and soul, which, by the way, is this stuff we're seeing right here, to the embryo at conception, not at birth, at conception. So think about that. Then what's more fascinating in this legend, and I don't believe it's a legend, the period of gestation, which for most women is somewhere in the 9-month period. Some babies come early, some come late. But the bottom line is they claim we are in converse with that angel. And when we exit mom's womb, of course, the baby's kicking and all that, getting the body ready. And then they say when the baby exits the womb between her legs, we at first breath have that angel tie the spirit, psyche, and soul to the body at the very first breath. I actually witnessed that with my son. I didn't know if that legend was true. And I'll never forget it because I literally saw 2 lights come in the room. I didn't see any wings or shapes. I just 2 lights. And he cried and it just lit up. And I just, oh my God, the hair stood up on my arm. And I actually she had to go C-section. So I was able to see around the tent and I got up and I ran around. And of course they had the umbilical cord cut and they already plopped them down on the table and they swatted his eyes with the silver. And he reached up and grabbed my thumbs. And I just went, oh my God. And I just melted. And I got to tell you, he just left a little while ago. Now he's 6'2", right? He's out running canyons. He's out running canyons tonight. For anybody who's heard, in California, we got a place called Stunt Road. It's a very famous road up in the canyons up in Malibu. So him and his buddies are out there tonight. But I gave him a double hug. I just love him. He's the joy of my life.
You must be feeding him Miracle Grow.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, no, I had an uncle that was 6'8". I think he got something from that.
Yeah. If you take the knowledge that you have here now by actually not predicting, but influencing in incidents, what do you see is being influenced for our near future? Any solutions, or could it get worse?
Very good question. Again, that's up to the amalgam of the celestial influences, humanity's collective consciousness, and the actions we take and reactions we have, and a little divinity mixed in there. Here's what's interesting. Okay, this is cool stuff. Every city, every house, every human being, everything on this planet, every tree, every plant, every animal has an angelic force around it that they say the celestial energies imbue at its creation. And that was fascinating is the United States is young enough where we have pretty accurate incorporation times of cities. And I've studied this stuff. One of the types of astrology I incorporate in readings is location astrology. You can see this is the winter solstice here. It's not anybody's birth chart. It's the world's birth chart for today of the winter solstice. And you can see all these different lines. These are planet energies that have like a 900-mile influence to the east, their strongest right on it, and about a 300-mile influence to the west. So it's this amalgam of energies. And I love this because it allows you to see what it's like for location astrology. But back to your question, and this is what's important, is the energy for the birth chart of the United States was believed to be recorded by a man named Ebenezer Sibley. And a lot of astrologers use different charts, and some of them are wonderful. But I like this one because Ebenezer was a Mason who was believed to have purportedly recorded when the bells started ringing in Philadelphia, and it was somewhere around 5:10 p.m. The boys started signing with the quill pens, right? So they didn't have big pens back then. They were using ink and quill pens. So the cool thing is that's when they agreed and started signing according to Sibley. And no matter what chart an astrologer uses, what I'm about to show you is going to be the same for everybody. And that is for everybody's types of chart in the United States. If they use July 4th, this is going to fit. So that's considered to be the birth of this nation. When they made a declaration and said, all right, we're doing this, we're gonna fight it out and get rid of King George, and we're gonna make our own country. So here's what's interesting, is that can be treated as a birth chart. So I'll spare you all the details. What's going on right now? Well, in the Civil War in 1860, there was something known as a Neptune square Neptune. See, Neptune takes about 180 years to go on the chart. So if you divide that in half, it's about 90 years. Not exact, give or take. It could slide back to 80 up to 96, because you're not dealing with years. You're dealing with retrogradation and direct planets. Now, the astronomers laugh at us astrologers about that, but they got to also remember we don't live on the sun like heliocentric models. Astronomy used in astrology is not helio, it's geocentric. You can actually see here on the screen, geo means Earth. It's Earth-centric. So what's interesting is Neptune did a series of aspects right before the Civil War, and we are in them right now. Right now, we are in the exact same aspects. Now, they started, I'll show you this. Interesting, you guys are in Arizona. The Arizona election review started. And I don't want to get political here because I don't want you to get knocked off. But I'll just tell you, all this stuff started happening. The border, they tore holes in the border and said, come on in and get your free America right about here, right? Open the place up. Just, stampede, folks. So whatever your political beliefs are, I don't mean to offend anybody, but we have to concede a lot of crazy stuff happened this spring, okay? That was what we call, see what you're seeing here, I know this looks really kind of like gobbledygook, but these wavy looking lines, for anybody who's into physics, those are called sine waves. That's how the planets are. They have this, what we call sinusoidal undulation of energy, which means as they go down and back up, they are going direct when they're down. They station and go retrograde. Retrograde is a term used in astrology. It means the planet appears to be going backwards from our perspective on Earth. We know the planets don't go backwards, but they do if you live on Earth. And I don't know about you guys, but that's where I live. And we all, we feel it. So then it stations and goes direct. This is why we always hear people, oh, Mercury's retrograde, right? And they're right. Mercury retrograde is when Mercury appears to be going backwards. Most people have heard of that. And right now, Venus is retrograde. We'll talk about that in a minute. So long story short, not to get too detailed, because you can make your eyeballs cross with astrology. It's very complex. But once you understand it, it's actually pretty simple. It's just a language, just like any language. So we've had this series of very manipulative, very coercive, I like to call it bamboozlement. We've been, my favorite movie is The Outlaw Josie Wales, where he said, Senator, don't piss down my back and tell me it's raining. And that's kind of what this is. And sorry, I'm being graphic here, but this is the urination down someone's back and telling you it's raining. So these are very coercive, very manipulative energies. Now notice, anybody remember what happened here? There's a little place called Afghanistan. And then we also found all kinds of mandates got instituted here. Yeah. So, and we've had massive issues going on with all kinds of bills and budgets to be passed, as we watch the food prices rise and we watch the gas prices rise and we watch the valuation of everything, inflate. And the Fed says, well, we're going to have to raise interest rates. And then everybody shambles and
Is this reflecting actually continuing into the future then?
Watch. The final aspect is right here, my friend. at the end of January. So you can see the dates right here. The final hurrah. See, things often come in threes. See, this was the first group. This Neptune square Mars, Neptune opposition Neptune happened in the spring. The second aspect was this summer when all that insanity happened. The final aspect is here. This is only the United States chart. So to those listening internationally, I can tell you it has an effect. You know, you have to remember the owners, the bankers that run the financial institutions use the United States as what I call the clearinghouse. In fact, the Federal Reserve is the dispensary. We know that. Wilson gave it to them. You know, it's the way it is. But be happy with what you got, folks, because it could be worse. But anyways, this is a wonderful country. I'll give them credit. They have poured in money. They keep pouring money in the mixer to keep it all moving. So long story short, it's very complex. The final aspect of these two energies show up right here. Right when that happened in 1860, shortly thereafter, I think it was April 6th, April 1st it was beginning of April of 1861, the Civil War broke out. Everybody said, that's it, I've had enough and we're going to war, right? And I'm not saying that's going to happen because I don't think it's going to be the same. And I'll show you why with Naadi Astrology later. Yeah. But what does show up is something right here. It's a little hard to see, but what you're looking at, see this little circle with a line up here? That's called a conjunction. See, all these little symbols are like squares, which are 90 degrees, and then you'll see little oppositions, and then you'll see triangles, which are triangles. They're just geometry. Astrology is all about what?
I see now that we are getting down to the very, very end of the show here.
Yeah, can he finish for us, though? I want to hear that.
Oh, let me summarize in plain English.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, okay, let me summarize because I'm getting way too detailed. We're going to have a Pluto return that commences right in between this final series of aspects. So unlike the Civil War, we are going to see this country is either going to turn into communism or socialism with a stars and striped flag still on it, or it's going to be the phoenix rising out of the ashes. Now, I ain't God, but I have used, well, actually, I've had the blessing of many clients, remote viewers, and other people ask me, Jeff, what do you see in the interrogation? And I've had the blessing of casting these charts. I maintain we're likely to be the phoenix rising out of the ashes. Real quick, let me jump over here. Here is the United States Sibley chart. This is, I'm sorry I did this by hand, so you're going to have to look at my chicken scratch here. But see, there's no computer programs in existence that currently do Naadi astrology. It's too old. They haven't figured it out. So I do it by hand, and I just draw this up, and this is actually a scan. Right here, this is it. This summer of July 4th of 2022, the United States will turn 246 years old. What does that mean in plain English? I can tell you, I have much higher hopes than the world's ending. You know, I listened to, I don't want to mention names, but I listened to someone talk years ago, 45 years ago, tell me, Jeff, the world's going to end and we're all going to end up in the next dimension. Well, that's never happened. You know, it'd be great if Jesus would come, but, and I hope he does, and the rest of them. But the point is that I think the world's going to keep going on. And I think it's going to keep going through transformations. But this shows the United States is going to go, the United States might be the phoenix rising out of the ashes. The only last thing I'll say about that, and then I'll let you have the floor, and that is, in order to have the phoenix come up out of the ashes, you first have to have transformation and ashes. That's what we're going to go through.
Yeah, and I think you're right. And I'm claiming.
I hope my analysis is right. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And we
Let's
got
hope.
just a little bit of time left, and there's one question I've been itching to ask, and we know we are not alone in the universe. There is other civilizations, and why are those civilizations not coming in to help out? Or is there a chance that they just might sit back and watch the movie, kind of like what we're doing?
Well, who's saying they're not helping out already? See, that's the interesting thing. Do you think I mean, science can't even ascertain how infinite the universe is. I mean, really, see, there's a text in Hebrew called the Sefer Yetzirah. Sefer means book, Yetzirah means formation. It's the 6-dimensional portions of space, forward, back, up, down, side, right, or left, right. So it's really pretty interesting what space is. And quantum physicists talk about these kinds of things. I mean, the possibilities of extraterrestrial help is overwhelming. I'm not so sure it's not like Men in Black already. I'm talking to Marines who are telling me, Jeff, we are tracking stuff off the coast of Malibu, underneath Malibu. I've actually had a kid who took a class. I used to teach physics at a college for a while. And he said, my dad's an admiral. And he says, we take submarines all the way down near to Salt Lake City. It's like honeycomb. And then I hear Marines telling me today, now, not just today, but very recently, that they are tracking stuff that comes in and out of our oceans so fast, they can barely measure the speed of it.
Yeah. I heard that too. In fact, that chart that you have here, I used to study a book called The Keys of Enoch, and you find it all in there, and it's extremely interesting.
Oh, yeah. Many versions of this. And you can crack this down to a personal level. Here's one that I love. This is one of my favorite diagrams. In psychology, they will tell us we have a conscious mind and a subconscious mind. Well, this big thick dashed line is kind of what we would like to call the demarcation between our conscious mind, subconscious mind. But maybe a better way to look at it, possibly, I suggest, is this is the present personality. It's what we think and what we believe right now, which is very myopic, and it's totally subjective. I mean, look at all the people who have realizations. The up above here, they say this is the collective karma. Notice the planet Saturn, which its glyph is the cross over the crescent of the moon. Yeah. And notice Jupiter is exactly the opposite, the crescent of the moon over the cross. There's much more secrets to the divinity of the symbolism alone in astrology than has ever been acknowledged in modern times. It's sure stunning. It's God's code. And what's interesting is, notice this is the human spirit, which takes in the collective incarnations, and this is the soul dripping down into these physical realms.
Let people know where they can get a hold of you also, and how to contact and have some services.
The best way is jeff@jeffharman.com, and that's HARMAN.com, jeff@jeffharman.com. Really simple. That's the best way, email. It's interesting. I've been trying to walk away from this business for years because I love motion picture work and stuff. And I just keep staying in it because there's only one reason I stay in doing this type of work. It's because it helps people. When I can help somebody find a reason why they're experiencing not that I'm God and I don't give anybody advice of what to do and what not to do, but I love when they're done that they see themselves in a higher spirit and divinity. And when we stop looking outside for everyone else's approval and start looking in here and maybe up there, or however you want to say it, for the divinity within, and realize we're not this physical world. I just lost 2 friends, 67 years old, they died, and nobody takes anything with us. We come in here bare butt naked, and we will leave the same way. If you think all this stuff we're taking with us, we don't. But what we do is this magical stuff right here that science has yet to figure out, and that is the etheric or soul force, spirit, psyche, and soul energy. Yeah. There's a wonderful text called the Share Hagilgum. This is one of many. The Share means gate, and Hagilgum means cyclings of the soul. Rome threw this out the window somewhere between the 2nd and 3rd century. The bearded men that were murdering each other to decide what Christians would be allowed to believe for the next 1,000 years or 2,000 years. And these texts are amazing. This is one of many, paralleling many of the ancient texts that talk about why we're here. It's fascinating stuff.
Yeah, that's where we need to go back into the old texts and find a lot more truth than we find in the new ones. So let people know your website again.
Jeff@jeffharman.com, HARMAN.com.
Okay.
Well, thanks for having me on. We did it quick, but it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, this has been really interesting. I'm going to go back and run this again, and I'm going to take some notes. I'm especially fond of what you said about before 4th of July this year, next year. And I think that's what we're going to have, the Phoenix rising.
Let's hope. Let's hope. And you know, I love what you said at the beginning of the show when she said she was wonderful. When she said, you know, Dr. Emoto, who I got a chance to meet, by the way, in Tucson. Remember him? He was the guy, Messages in Water. I encourage anyone who doesn't know about him to research him. Dr. Emoto was a sweetheart. He took water. He would have people pray over it. He would sample waters from wells or different places, and he proved what everyone has never been able to scientifically prove by freezing water, putting it under a microscope. He proved positive sacred thoughts, always had sacred geometrical shapes, and negativity, fear, worry, and discord always came out looking like gobbledygook. Well, I got to show you something here on the screen really quick. And this is what's interesting and very exceedingly relatable to what you were saying at the beginning of the show when she was talking about the wonderful prayers and intentions. You are a thought form elemental generation machine. The chakras, we look with these, but we project with this. And science doesn't want us to even acknowledge it. Well, not that they're out to not have us acknowledge, but the third eye chakra is also known as the Jupiter chakra. And if you study auras, you can actually see people's elementals coming out. There's an old saying, what you are, speak so loudly, I can't hear a word that you're saying. And if you examine people, you can see physiognomy, you can see their facial expressions, who they are. It's so beautiful to realize that what you think actually projects. Did anybody ever say that before? All causation is mental. Read Sermon on the Mount. It's exactly what he said. So the interesting thing is the human, they say when people join together in collective consciousness for good or evil, you know, look at Hitler, look at Mao, look at Stalin. You join together with good or evil, you can move mountains. It's the fabric. They say the whole physical realms in the Yetziratic world. There's an ancient saying that if God's seraphim stop chanting his name, and you can call God a his or he or she, we'll just say God. But the bottom line is they say that they chant the divinity of creation 10,800 times per hour. Now, I don't know if that's exact, but that's what I've heard, that if they stopped, all of the universes would go gone. They'd be gone. So everything here, if you talk to a physicist, they'll all tell you, well, it's all molecules and atoms. Well, they're probably right. I don't know. I haven't held one, but you're part of one. We all are. And they say the only difference between gold and silver and your hair and your thoughts and all the electrons that we're hearing this broadcast with going through the airwaves or internet is just energy being transmuted from atoms and molecules and empty spaces. Well, those angels apparently are holding all this together. So if these bozos want to possess people and do pedophilia and kill people and drink adrenochrome, sorry, we're going to get you knocked off YouTube. But if they want to do all this horrible stuff and black magic, they're going to find that the only thing they're destroying is their own souls. Because if it wasn't for these upper angels holding all this in abeyance, I don't think creation would exist. And Emoto shed light on that.
Yes, exactly.
It's got to be a glue in the fabric.
Thanks, Jeff.
Pretty amazing. Pretty amazing.
Really good.
Well, Nori, we're down to the end here.
Yeah, and many blessings to everybody on the holidays. I hope everyone has a great Christmas, Hanukkah, whatever you celebrate. You know, it's an amazing time of the year.
Yes, it is.
Blessings.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Oh, well, thank you for having me.
We'll see everybody next week. Thanks for hanging out late. Much love, everybody. Good night.
See you then. Live long and prosper.